Here's the thing about fairy tales, they're supposed to end happily ever after, right? But Princess Diana's story is different. It's the cautionary tale we still can't look away from, decades later. On the surface, she had everything: the glass coach, the royal wedding watched by millions, the prince. But behind those palace walls, the fairy tale was already crumbling. And the cameras that captured her rise would eventually play a role in her death. This is the story of a woman who became the most photographed person on earth, and how that fame turned deadly. Diana Frances Spencer wasn't born royal, which is actually part of what made her so compelling. She was an aristocrat, sure, but she worked as a kindergarten teacher. She was 19 years old when Prince Charles started courting her, and he was 32, which is wild when you think about it. She was young, shy, and completely unprepared for what was coming. The palace saw her as perfect, young enough to mold, aristocratic enough to be acceptable, and photogenic enough to revive a stuffy monarchy. What they didn't count on was that she'd have her own ideas about how to live. Their engagement interview should have been a red flag to everyone watching. When asked if they were in love, Diana said yes immediately. "Charles?" he said, "whatever in love means." Imagine hearing that on television, the whole world watching. That phrase, "whatever in love means," it basically summarized their entire relationship. Diana was head over heels. Charles was already emotionally entangled with Camilla Parker Bowles, his former girlfriend. The night before the wedding, Diana actually found a bracelet Charles had commissioned for Camilla. She considered calling the whole thing off. But by then, the world was watching, and there was no escape route. The wedding was, by any measure, a spectacle. 750 million people watched worldwide. St. Paul's Cathedral. The 25-foot train on her dress. The glass coach. Diana was now the Princess of Wales, and the crowds adored her. But here's what most people didn't know: she was already bulimic by the wedding day. The pressure, the scrutiny, Charles's coldness, it had already begun to destroy her from the inside. She'd gone from a size 12 to a size 10 in the weeks before the wedding. The eating disorder would plague her for years, a secret battle fought behind the smiling photographs that sold millions of newspapers. Bulimia nervosa became Diana's way of exerting control over a life that felt completely out of her hands. She'd binge and purge multiple times a day at the worst points. She later admitted that her husband's affair with Camilla triggered much of it. She felt inadequate, unloved, trapped. The palace knew something was wrong but didn't know how to handle mental health issues, so they mostly ignored it. Diana was expected to smile, wave, produce airs, and stay silent. The bulimia was her body's rebellion, the only protest she could make in private while performing perfection in public. Life inside Kensington Palace and the other royal residences was suffocating for Diana. She described feeling like a prisoner, monitored constantly, her every move reported back to senior royals. Charles was distant, often away, and when he was home, he was on the phone with Camilla. Diana was lonely, isolated, and had no real support system. The royal family operates on duty and tradition. Emotions are considered weaknesses. Diana, who was emotional and empathetic, didn't fit the mold. She'd cry, and they'd tell her to pull herself together. She needed help, and they handed her a schedule of royal engagements instead. Diana did produce the heirs the monarchy needed. Prince William was born in 1982, and Prince Harry in 1984. For a brief period, the marriage looked functional from the outside. But according to Diana, Charles's interest in her basically ended once Harry was born. She'd done her job, provided an heir and a spare. After Harry's birth, Charles openly resumed his relationship with Camilla. Diana knew, the palace knew, eventually the public would know. But for years, Diana had to play the perfect wife and mother while her husband carried on an affair that everyone pretended wasn't happening. Let's talk about Camilla Parker Bowles, because she's central to this whole tragedy. Charles had loved her before Diana, but Camilla wasn't considered suitable for a future king. She wasn't virginal, wasn't young enough, wasn't aristocratic in the right way. So Charles married Diana instead, the acceptable choice. But he never stopped loving Camilla. Phone calls, secret meetings, love letters, it was a full-blown affair. Diana once confronted Camilla at a party, telling her, "I know what's going on." But nothing changed. The affair continued, and Diana's mental state deteriorated further, knowing she was essentially the third person in her own marriage. Here's where Diana started to find her power, though: public appearances. She was naturally charismatic, warm, and genuinely empathetic, qualities the royal family had been lacking for decades. When she shook hands with AIDS patients in 1987 without gloves, it was revolutionary. She hugged sick children. She sat on the edges of hospital beds. She made eye contact. The public fell in love with her in a way they'd never loved Charles or the Queen. The press couldn't get enough of her. Every photograph sold. Every story about her generated headlines. And Diana began to realize she had influence, she had a platform, and she could use it. But here's the dark side of that fame: the press became absolutely obsessed. Paparazzi followed her everywhere, to the gym, to restaurants, on vacation, to her children's school. They hid in bushes, chased her car, used telephoto lenses from hundreds of yards away. Diana sold newspapers and magazines like nothing else. A photo of Diana could command tens of thousands of pounds. So the incentive to get that shot, any shot, was enormous. And there were no real laws protecting her. The British press was self-regulated, which basically meant unregulated. Diana was the most valuable commodity in media, and she was being hunted daily for it. By the early 1990s, the marriage was openly falling apart. Both Charles and Diana were leaking stories to the press through intermediaries, trying to control the narrative. Diana cooperated with Andrew Morton on a secret biography, Diana, Her True Story, published in 1992. It exposed everything: the bulimia, the suicide attempts, Camilla's affair, the cold royal family. The palace was furious. Charles's camp retaliated with their own leaks. It became a full-on media war, each side using journalists as weapons. And the paparazzi were there for every moment, every rumor, every photographable piece of evidence that the fairy tale was dead. In December 1992, Prime Minister John Major announced to Parliament that Charles and Diana were separating. It was a huge deal: the future king's marriage was over. But they weren't divorcing yet, which meant Diana was in this weird limbo, still technically royal, still doing engagements, but publicly estranged. The press coverage intensified even more. Diana was now the wronged wife, the victim, and the public sided with her overwhelmingly. Charles's approval ratings tanked. And Diana, for the first time, started to taste a little bit of freedom. She could make her own decisions, see her own friends, live a bit more on her own terms. But the paparazzi? They ramped up even more. In 1995, Diana did something extraordinary and, in hindsight, kind of reckless. She gave a secret interview to Martin Bashir for BBC's Panorama without telling the palace. 23 million people in the UK watched it. She talked about her bulimia, her self-harm, Charles's affair, and she dropped the line, "There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded." It was devastating, honest, and it destroyed any remaining hope of reconciliation. The Queen reportedly watched it and immediately ordered them to divorce. Diana had taken control of her narrative, but it came at a cost. The royal family now wanted her gone completely. In August 1996, the divorce was finalized. Diana lost her Royal Highness title, which she cared about more than people realized. It was about respect and status. She got a £17 million settlement and kept her apartments at Kensington Palace. She also kept her role as mother to William and Harry, which was the most important thing to her. But here's the thing: divorcing Charles didn't free her from the media circus. If anything, it got worse. She was now a single woman, dating, living her life in public. Every man she was seen with became a tabloid sensation. Every holiday, every outfit, every moment was photographed, analyzed, and sold. Diana tried to build a new life. She dated a heart surgeon, Hasnat Khan, whom she apparently loved deeply, though he hated the media attention. She continued her charity work, landmines, AIDS, homelessness. She was genuinely trying to use her fame for good. But the paparazzi were relentless. They'd chase her car at high speeds through London. They'd camp outside her gym. They'd follow her on vacation. She complained about it constantly, even gave speeches about media intrusion. But the tabloids argued she courted publicity, that she used the press when it suited her. There was truth on both sides, but the harassment was undeniable and dangerous. In the summer of 1997, Diana started dating Dodi Fayed, the son of Mohammed Al Fayed, who owned Harrods and the Ritz Paris. Dodi was a film producer, wealthy, charming. They vacationed on his father's yacht in the Mediterranean. The photos from that summer, Diana in a swimsuit on a yacht, kissing Dodi, were worth a fortune to paparazzi. Every tabloid in the world wanted them. The relationship was only a few weeks old, but the media treated it like the romance of the century. And the paparazzi presence around them became more aggressive, more invasive. Everywhere they went, there were cameras. It was suffocating, and it was about to turn deadly. On August 30, 1997, Diana and Dodi flew to Paris. They spent the evening at the Ritz Hotel, which was owned by Dodi's father. Paparazzi were swarming outside. There were dozens of them, on motorcycles and in cars, waiting for any shot. Diana and Dodi had dinner at the hotel restaurant, then decided to leave for Dodi's apartment. The plan was to use a decoy car out front while they slipped out the back with their driver, Henri Paul, and bodyguard Trevor Rees-Jones. It was supposed to be a simple trick to avoid the cameras. But the paparazzi weren't fooled, and they were ready to chase. At around 12:20 a.m. on August 31, Diana, Dodi, Henri Paul, and Trevor Rees-Jones got into a black Mercedes S280 and left the Ritz via the rear exit. Almost immediately, paparazzi on motorcycles spotted them and gave chase. Henri Paul accelerated, trying to lose them. Witnesses later said the Mercedes was going extremely fast. Estimates ranged from 65 to 95 miles per hour through the streets of Paris. The paparazzi kept pace, weaving through traffic, running red lights. It was a high-speed chase through a major city at night, and it was incredibly dangerous. Diana must have been terrified. This was her nightmare made real. The car entered the Pont de l'Alma tunnel, an underpass beneath the Seine. Inside the tunnel, Henri Paul lost control. The Mercedes clipped a white Fiat Uno, swerved, hit a pillar at high speed, spun, and slammed into the tunnel wall. The crash was catastrophic. Dodi and Henri Paul were killed instantly. Trevor Rees-Jones, the bodyguard, was critically injured but survived. Diana was alive but gravely injured, trapped in the wreckage. And here's the horrifying part: within minutes, paparazzi arrived at the crash scene. Instead of immediately helping, some of them started taking photographs of Diana dying in the car. It's one of the most grotesque details of this whole tragedy. Diana was conscious at first. Witnesses said she was saying, "Oh my God," and "leave me alone." Firefighters and paramedics arrived and worked to free her from the wreckage. It took over an hour to stabilize her enough to move. She was taken to the Pitié-Salpêtrière hospital. Doctors operated for 2 hours, trying to repair internal injuries and massive chest trauma. But her heart had been displaced by the impact, and the internal bleeding was too severe. At 4 a.m. on August 31, 1997, doctors pronounced Diana dead. She was 36 years old. The woman the world couldn't stop watching was gone. 7 paparazzi photographers were initially detained by French police. They were potentially facing manslaughter charges for causing the crash by chasing the car. Evidence was gathered: cameras, film, witness statements. But here's what the investigation found: Henri Paul, the driver, had been drinking. His blood alcohol level was 3 times the legal limit. He was also on prescription medication. And he was driving recklessly fast. In 1999, French authorities closed the investigation, ruling it an accident caused by Paul's intoxication and speed. The paparazzi were released without charges. But that didn't satisfy everyone. Many still blamed the photographers for creating the circumstances that led to the chase. The British weren't satisfied with the French findings, so in 2004, a formal inquest began. It went on for years and cost millions. In 2008, a jury concluded that Diana and Dodi were unlawfully killed due to gross negligence by both Henri Paul and the paparazzi. They found that the pursuit by photographers contributed to the crash. It was the official acknowledgement many had wanted: the paparazzi shared responsibility. But no one was ever prosecuted. No one served time. The photographers walked away. Diana was dead, and the people who chased her to that tunnel faced no real consequences. It remains one of the most controversial findings in British legal history. Let's look at the cold, hard numbers, because they tell their own story. Diana was chased by at least 9 paparazzi on motorcycles that night. Henri Paul's blood alcohol level was 0.175, nearly 4 times the French legal limit. The car was traveling between 65 and 95 miles per hour. The impact speed when it hit the pillar was estimated at 65 miles per hour. Diana suffered massive chest injuries and cardiac arrest. And within hours of her death, photographs of the crash scene were already being shopped to tabloids for hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's a story told in speeds, blood alcohol, and blood money. The public reaction was unprecedented. Within days, Kensington Palace was buried under a sea of flowers, millions of bouquets. People camped out, weeping, leaving notes and teddy bears. The outpouring of grief was so massive that the royal family, who'd initially stayed in Scotland, faced backlash for not returning to London immediately. When Diana's funeral was held on September 6, 1997, an estimated 2.5 billion people watched worldwide. It was one of the most watched events in television history. Diana, in death, commanded the world's attention one final time. The people's princess was mourned by the people, and the world felt like it had lost something irreplaceable. At Diana's funeral, Elton John performed a rewritten version of Candle in the Wind, originally about Marilyn Monroe. He changed the lyrics to honor Diana: "Goodbye England's rose, may you ever grow in our hearts." It was devastatingly beautiful. The song was later released as a single, and it became the best-selling single in UK history, raising millions for Diana's charities. It captured what so many felt: Diana was like a candle, burning bright, and the world had snuffed her out too soon. The parallels to Marilyn were obvious: both beautiful, both troubled, both destroyed by fame and the relentless pursuit of cameras. Both dead far too young. Diana's sons, William and Harry, were 15 and 12 years old. They walked behind her coffin in the funeral procession, a moment that haunted the world. Harry later said he doesn't remember much of it, that he was in shock. William has spoken about how difficult it was to grieve publicly, with cameras on them the entire time. Both boys have been open in recent years about the trauma of losing their mother so suddenly, so publicly, and at such young ages. Harry, especially, has blamed the paparazzi and the media for her death. He said he fears the same thing could happen to his wife, Meghan. The trauma is generational now, passed from Diana to her sons. Diana's death forced a reckoning, or at least, it should have. The Press Complaints Commission in the UK issued guidelines about paparazzi conduct in privacy. Editors promised restraint. There was talk of legal reforms. But did anything really change? For a few years, maybe. The British tabloids backed off a bit. But the rise of the internet, celebrity blogs, and social media brought a whole new level of intrusion. Paparazzi still chase celebrities. Photos still sell. The machinery that killed Diana didn't stop, it just evolved. The hunger for celebrity images is arguably worse now. We just have phones instead of motorcycles, Instagram instead of tabloids. But the invasiveness is the same. I'd be remiss not to mention the conspiracy theories, because they've persisted for decades. Mohammed Al-Fayed, Dodi's father, insisted for years that Diana was murdered by British intelligence on orders from the royal family, because they didn't want her marrying a Muslim and potentially having his child. He pointed to inconsistencies, alleged cover-ups, missing evidence. Multiple investigations, including the 2008 British inquest, found no credible evidence of foul play. But the theories won't die. Some people can't accept that it was just a tragic accident caused by a drunk driver and a reckless chase. Maybe it's easier to believe in a conspiracy than to accept the mundane, awful truth: she died because of speed, alcohol, and cameras. So who was responsible? The official answer: Henri Paul, for driving drunk and reckless. The paparazzi, for creating the chase. But let's be honest, it's bigger than that. The tabloid editors who paid fortunes for Diana photos. The publishers who profited from them. The public who bought the magazines and newspapers, hungry for every detail of her life. We all played a role in the system that consumed her. Diana once said, "The press is ferocious. It forgives nothing, it only hunts for mistakes." She knew she was prey. And in the end, the hunt killed her. Responsibility is shared, diffuse, uncomfortable. It's easier to blame a drunk driver than to look in the mirror. Diana's death changed things, just not as much as it should have. Privacy laws were tightened in some places. The Human Rights Act in the UK was strengthened. Paparazzi became slightly more cautious, at least for a while. But the bigger legacy is cultural. Diana's story is a warning about fame, media, and the cost of celebrity. She's a symbol of how we build people up and tear them down. She's also a reminder that behind every photograph is a human being, with feelings, with trauma, with a breaking point. Her sons are now crusading for mental health awareness and privacy rights, carrying on her work in their own way. Diana's death was supposed to be a turning point. Instead, it's a cautionary tale we keep ignoring. Let's be clear, the paparazzi didn't physically kill Diana. Henri Paul was driving, and he was drunk. But they created the conditions that made the crash happen. They chased her relentlessly for years. They made her life unbearable. They turned her into a commodity, a target, a prize. And on that August night in Paris, they chased her car into a tunnel at high speed, and she died. The British inquest said it: they shared responsibility. But here's the thing, it wasn't just those 9 photographers on motorcycles. It was the entire industry, the entire culture, the entire system that turned a shy kindergarten teacher into the most hunted woman on earth. The paparazzi were just the symptom. We were the disease. Diana spent her last years fighting for some measure of freedom. She wanted to live life on her own terms, date who she wanted, raise her sons her way, do charity work that mattered to her. She wanted privacy, normalcy, respect. But she couldn't have it. The fairy tale she'd been sold as a 19-year-old had become a prison, and even after divorce, the bars remained. The paparazzi were the guards. The tabloids were the wardens. And the public, consuming every story, every photo, every rumor, we were complicit. Diana fought for freedom her entire adult life, and she never truly got it. The only escape was death, and even that was photographed. When Diana died, we lost more than a princess. We lost a humanitarian who was genuinely making a difference. Her landmine campaign led to an international treaty. We lost a mother who was modernizing how royals raised their kids, hugging them, taking them to theme parks. We lost a woman who was open about mental health struggles, eating disorders, and marital abuse at a time when no one talked about those things. She was 36. She had decades of work left in her. Who knows what else she could have accomplished, what other causes she'd have championed, how she'd have supported her sons. We lost all of that because of a drunk driver and a pack of photographers chasing a photograph they could sell. The Pont d'Alma tunnel is still there, of course. It's just an underpass in Paris. But above it, there's a memorial, the Flame of Liberty, a replica of the Statue of Liberty's torch. It's become an unofficial shrine to Diana. People leave flowers, photos, messages. It's a pilgrimage site for those who loved her, who felt connected to her, who mourn what happened. The tunnel itself is a symbol now, a dark place where a bright life was extinguished. It's a reminder that fame can be deadly, that privacy matters, and that the relentless pursuit of a photograph can have fatal consequences. That tunnel is where the fairy tale finally, definitively, ended. In the end, Diana's story is about an individual versus a machine. On one side, a young woman trying to live, love, and do good in the world. On the other, a massive media industrial complex that commodified her image, invaded her privacy, and profited from her pain. She fought it, gave interviews, took control of her narrative, spoke her truth. But the machine was too big, too relentless, too hungry. It chased her to the end. And when she died, the machine kept grinding. The tabloids that hounded her sold millions of copies with her death on the cover. The photographers who chased her shopped crash photos for six-figure sums. Diana lost the battle. The machine won. And it's still running. Here's a question worth sitting with. What's a photograph worth? To the paparazzi that night, a photo of Diana and Dodi leaving the Ritz was worth tens of thousands. A photo of them in the car, even more. A photo of the crash? Hundreds of thousands. But what did it cost? It cost Diana her life. It cost William and Harry their mother. It cost the world a humanitarian, a role model, someone who was genuinely trying to use her platform for good. So yeah, those photographers got their shots. Some of them probably got paid. But the real cost was incalculable. And we, the public who consumed those images, we paid that cost too. We just didn't realize it at the time. Diana's death feels especially relevant now, in the age of social media and smartphones. The same dynamics are at play: celebrities hounded, privacy invaded, every moment documented and monetized. The difference is that now we're all paparazzi. We take photos, we post them, we tag people, we comment. We've democratized the invasion of privacy. And celebrities are speaking out about it. Prince Harry has been vocal about protecting his family from the same fate. Britney Spears, Meghan Markle, countless others have talked about the mental health toll of constant scrutiny. Diana's story was a warning. We're still not listening. We've just given everyone a camera and called it progress. Let's circle back to where this really began: Charles's betrayal. If Charles had loved Diana, if he'd ended things with Camilla, if he'd supported her instead of isolating her, maybe none of this happens. Maybe she doesn't develop bulimia. Maybe she doesn't feel trapped. Maybe she doesn't become the tabloid target she did. But Charles chose Camilla, and the palace chose duty over humanity. They broke Diana, slowly, for years. And then they acted surprised when she spoke out, when she rebelled, when she fought back. The paparazzi killed her body, but the royal family killed her spirit long before that. The betrayal was the first domino. The tunnel was just where the last one fell. It's been over 2 decades since Diana died, and we're still talking about her. She's still on magazine covers. Documentaries are still being made. This video exists because her story still resonates. Why? Because it's a tragedy that didn't have to happen. Because she was so young, so full of potential. Because we watched it unfold in real time and couldn't or wouldn't stop it. Diana's death is a mirror. When we look at it, we see our obsession with celebrity, our hunger for gossip, our complicity in the machine that destroys people for profit. It's uncomfortable. But maybe that's the point. Maybe we're supposed to feel uncomfortable. Maybe that's the only way things change. Diana earned the title People's Princess, and it stuck because it was true. She wasn't beloved by the palace, they found her difficult, emotional, unpredictable. But the people loved her. She connected with ordinary folks in a way royals never had. She wasn't afraid to show vulnerability, to admit she was struggling, to break protocol and hug someone who needed it. That's why her death felt so personal to millions. That's why people wept in the streets. She was theirs, not the palace's. And in a way, she still is. The statue of Diana that William and Harry unveiled at Kensington Palace shows her with children, arms around them, protective and loving. That's how we remember her, as someone who cared, who fought, and who deserved so much better than she got. So here's what we're left with: a fairy tale that was never real, a marriage that was a prison, a woman who fought for freedom and never found it, and a death that was both accident and inevitability. Diana's story is a tragedy in the classical sense. Her fate was sealed the moment she stepped into that royal life, and no amount of fighting could save her from it. The paparazzi chased her into that tunnel, but the forces that put her there started years earlier, with a cold husband, a colder institution, and a media culture that treated her like prey. She was hunted for years. On August 31, 1997, the hunt finally ended. And we lost someone irreplaceable. That's the story of the paparazzi that killed the people's princess.